Well, it's wonderful to be here with you. Always has been, and I appreciate Rabbi Noah's wisdom, his collegiality, his warmth, and the beautiful words which he had spoken in every manner is inspiring. I appreciated the words he offered pertaining to the land of Israel and how vital it is. And I've directed my thoughts to Israel on this evening's holiday because it's so important. Israel is proud of what it's been able to maintain and how important it is for us as a community to realize the great depths of conviction and of hope and of satisfaction that has come from the land of Israel. It's taken a long time. There's a cute story about a Texan, a wealthy Texan who comes to Israel to visit Israel. And he wants to see the Israeli farms because he had a farm. And he's escorted by his colleagues in Israel. And he wants to impress the Israeli farmers. And he says, you know, in Texas, I have a ranch that is so big, so vast, that it takes me 5 days to get into my tractor and drive it to the other side of my ranch. It takes me 5 days to get to the other side. That's how large it is. 5 days it takes me. And the Israeli kibbutznik says, I have a tractor just like that. Takes me 5 days to go that far. We have a good reason to be satisfied and moved by what Israel has done. During the presidency of Jimmy Carter, the president invited American rabbis to come to the White House in order to celebrate a peace agreement between Israel and Egypt so many years ago. It was an exciting and dramatic moment. Hundreds of rabbis were invited to go to the White House to see the leaders of Egypt and Israel sign a peace agreement. And that was the first year in the rabbinate here at Congregation Shalom. I had been a rabbi in Rochester, New York for 4 years, and then the next year I came to serve with Rabbi Pastor, who was an extraordinarily fine man. It was the year 1979. And at the White House, assembled with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of rabbis, Anwar Sadat and Menachem Begin, the president, so to speak, of Egypt and also of Israel, had a peace treaty. There was something so exciting and so meaningful. It was hard to explain the vast emotions that we were feeling, that this little state of Israel, who has fought from the very beginning of its existence to now reach a situation where the president of Egypt will sign a peace treaty with the prime minister of Israel. And it was a time of excitement. Jimmy Carter, maybe it was because he has a certain spiritual element of his soul who believes that people of different religions should come together and respect each other. I don't know for sure if that was the reason, but he did so, and it was a proud time. And I was proud to be there. Unfortunately, Sadat was assassinated in 1981, removing all hope for some words of peace. We wanted to be able to say, Shalom Aleichem, in Hebrew, and in Arabic, Salam Aleikum. May there be peace upon us. Yet that year, perhaps an enthusiastic hope brightened the landscape eventually. For peace in the Middle East, we hope and we pray would have been there and occurred. But unfortunately, the death of Anwar Sadat struggles us and pains us. But we've come a long ways, and it hasn't been easy. And I'd like to share with you something about Israel that goes back to the year 1933, before Israel was established as a country. It was on a warm, dark evening in June of 1933, where Chaim Al-Asaraf, I'll share with you who he was, Chaim Al-Asaraf and his wife Sima walked arm in arm along a Tel Aviv beach. They hadn't seen each other in over a month. Al-Asaraf had left Israel on a mission. When they got home, he was excited to be home and back in what we would hope it would be Israel in 1933, but it wasn't until 1947. And they got a babysitter for their kids. They went to an Israeli restaurant along the Mediterranean, and then they went for a walk along the Mediterranean. They held each other in an embrace as they walked, hugging the Mediterranean's shoreline as they hugged each other. They walked and they talked, thinking they were alone in this desolate strip of beach, and yet from out of the darkness stepped two men and called out a word, Kama Hasha'a, Kama Hasha'a. That's all they heard. As I'll explain in a minute, it wasn't even an appropriate statement. Kama Hasha'a. One shined a flashlight in Al-Asaraf's face and said, Kama Hasha'a again, which is an incorrect construction of the Hebrew phrase, what time is it? It should have been Mahasha'a. That's what is pronounced in Hebrew, Mahasha'a. What time is it? And as the question was asked, the other man withdrew a Browning automatic and fired a bullet into Chaya Al-Asaraf's chest. And he dropped, his blood spilling on the Israeli sand. The attackers fled as his wife Sima screamed in horror, "Help! Help! Help someone! Jews shot him!" And the bleeding Al-Asaraf, still alive, immediately corrected her and said, "No, Sima, no. It wasn't a Jew. It wasn't a Jew." Because he would not have said, Kama Hasha'a. It was a person who tried to speak Hebrew, but confused himself. Though rushed to the nearest hospital, Chaim Al-Asaraf 34 years old, Jewish statesman and Zionist leader, unfortunately died that day. Who killed this man? Who killed Chaim Arlasarov in that year of 1933, 14 years before Israel would become a state? Who murdered Chaim Arlasarov and why? His funeral was the largest in the history of mandatory Palestine. They claimed that 70 to 100,000 mourners came. Somehow, I don't know where they fit all those people there, but they came to give respect to Chaim Arlasarov. Chaim Arlasarov was a provocative and controversial figure. Yet rumors circulated that Chaim Arlasarov was engaged in perpetrating secret deals with Adolf Hitler and the Third Reich. Could this be true? If it indeed there did exist truth in these rumors, there may be many who wished Arlasarov dead. Did Arlasarov had something to do with the Nazi government in Germany in 1933? Do you recall the year that Hitler became the head of Germany? 1933. Indeed, he had traveled to Nazi Germany. Nobody knew why, but he had meetings with the Nazis in 1933. First was this deal which Chaim Arlasarov forged. What was it all about? For him to have the audacity to deal with the devil himself. That question is taken up in a book that was entitled The Transfer Agreement, written by Edwin Black. Black is a Chicago journalist who heard rumors in 1933 that the Zionist organization dealt with the Third Reich. The Zionist organization, or a Zionist organization, dealt with the Third Reich? How could that possibly have been? The implications of these negotiations were startling. The leaders of the Zionist organization negotiating with a madman who said of himself in 1933, quote, Hitler. I'm sorry to quote Hitler. He said, in 500 or 600 years, the name of Adolf Hitler would be honored in all lands as the man who once and for all exterminated the Jewish pest from the world. Could a Jewish agent from the land of Palestine, striving to create a country of Israel, interact with a person like that? Can the world believe that Zionists would deal with that man and that man deal with Jews? Incredible. Incredible. But it happened. The purpose of these negotiations was to release German Jews and a certain amount of their assets from the grip of the Third Reich. Both the German Jewish people and their assets would be transferred to Palestine. It's so interesting that Jews, wealthy Jews who had lived in Germany, and the assets that they had would be transferred from Germany to Palestine in order to create a Jewish country. In that manner, these middle-class professional German Jews coupled with their desperately needed funds, helped construct a Jewish state. But why? Why would the Nazis, on one hand, strip the Jews of their rights, of their prosperity, of their dignity, of their life, and on the other hand, assist the Zionists who were building a Jewish country? What would the Jews need to offer the Germans in return first? And why were the Germans interested in building a Jewish country in the Middle East? The Zionists were to import German goods. In other words, buy German. If we help you create a Jewish state, you need to agree to buy German. Don't buy English. Don't buy French. Don't buy Dutch. Don't buy any other country's goods in order to construct a Jewish country. In that manner, financially decayed Germany would gain by establishing Palestine as a lucrative market for German supplies. Secondly, within the midst of Germany's 1933 economic woes, a concerted worldwide effort was mounted to boycott German goods. This was one of Hitler's problems, that goods were being boycotted and Germany was in financial straits. Nations all over the world canceled other materials made and shipped from Germany. The Germany of which Adolf Hitler took charge of in 1933 was financially crippled. Indeed, his anti-Jewish campaign he fanned the fires of hatred against him. Indeed, Jewish organizations had mobilized much of the world to demonstrate against Hitler and boycott German goods. The boycott had been intensified at the beginning of Hitler's reign, and the Third Reich might have faltered and fallen into its own abyss. And Hitler wanted the Zionists to oppose the fight against the boycott, which was organized and administered by many of their Jewish brothers and sisters around the world. Was indeed Germany willing to help create a Jewish state in return for Jews to buy German goods? It was Chaim Alasarov who traveled to Germany in order to work out the complicated arrangements of releasing frozen Jewish assets to come to Palestine. You know, later in the war, if Jews wanted to leave, they couldn't take any of their surpluses, of the money that they had, of the jewelry that they may have. As the years went by, they would have had to turn over all of that material or those funds to the Nazis. It was Chaim Alasarov who tried to arrange for the movement of German Jews to Palestine. It was Chaim Alasarov who returned to Palestine and negotiated with pro-Jewish and anti-Jewish Arab leaders about purchase of land upon which to settle these German Jews. Land which would be paid for by, once again, German Jewish money. And it was Chaim Alasarov who spoke with those Arabs so as to create a binational state consisting of Arabs and Jews. It was Chaim Alasarov who sought British support for a plan which would witness the flow of German, not English goods, to Palestine. There was tremendous amount of fight and anger between Germany and Great Britain. And if Jews were not going to buy from Great Britain, then they would have to buy from Germany. In other words, was a Jewish prominent leader working with the devil. Who wanted Alasarov dead? Because he was killed when he came back on that Mediterranean shore. Poor fellow. They all sought his death. The Jews thought he was a traitor for negotiating with the Nazis. So, did Jews in Palestine want Alasarov dead? The most demonic enemy of the Jewish people had ever known. Was he really negotiating with the Nazis? Or the Arabs wanted him dead for negotiating with the Arabs because they wanted to have an equal place in Palestine as well. They needed a place, so they were angry. They may have, or whomever, may have wanted him dead. The British saw his plan as a boon for German economy, not the British. Alasarov was a person who still was beloved, even though for some reason they don't understand why it was that he was communicating with the Nazis. There are street signs in every single major city in Israel that says Alasarov Street. So who killed Chaim Alasarov? To this day, no one ever would know. Yet the incorrect information of the Hebrew question that night, not kama hasha'a, it should have been ma hasha'a, suggests that the killers of this Chaim Alasarov were not Jews. There existed two dynamics which allowed for the Nazis to negotiate the Zionists in order to transfer Jews from Germany to Palestine. First of all, there was the need to stop the anti-German boycott. Rabbi Stephen Weiss, who was a renowned rabbi in New York City, at that same time was pushing businesses and corporations to do no work with the Germans. And people who were involved in high echelon communities, business communities, turned their backs on Germany because they were aware of the danger. Secondly, there is a history of anti-Semitism in Germany that goes back to the 1200s itself. Jews lived in Germany in the 1200s because they thought it was a safe place to stay. But anti-Semitism that we talk about, particularly in Germany, had its origins in the 1200s. And Jews had to flee Germany in order to save their lives. And most of them traveled northeast to Russia. And Russia was taking in Jews. And that's why so many of Ashkenazi Jews, if you're an Ashkenazi Jew, there's so many of them went to Russia in order to find safe haven and live there. And eventually, by the late 1790s and 1800s, Jews eventually came to the United States because of the anti-Semitism there. Yet there existed a deep-rooted anti-Semitic attitude which linked to both the church and the politics. This is important, too, for us to consider before I conclude. The church in Germany, which influenced the Nazis. In 1543, Martin Luther published a vitriolic anti-Semitic pamphlet entitled "On the Jews and Their Lies." Martin Luther wrote this. Luther said, "They, the Jews, have been bloodthirsty bloodhounds and murderers. The sun has never shone on a more bloodthirsty and vengeful people. Luther suggested a solution to the Jewish problem in Germany. Now listen to this from 1543. This is what he said, Martin Luther. I shall give you my sincere advice. First, set fire to their synagogues or schools. This is a clergyman in Germany. Second, I advise that their houses all be razed and destroyed. Third, I advise that their prayer books be taken from them. Fourth, I advise that their rabbis be forbidden to teach on pain of loss, life, and limb. Fifth, I advise that safe conduct on the highways be abolished completely for Jews. Sixth, I advise that all cash and treasure of silver and gold be taken from them. 7, I recommend forced labor. However, Martin Luther felt that since Jews had no capacity to work, it would rather be the duty of all to drive them out like mad dogs. Quote, drive them out like mad dogs, end quote. And so there we have it. 400 years before the arrival of the Nazis, a plan and a guide which was taken step by Hitler did it precisely what he was told. A revival of Luther's anti-Semitic philosophy grew in the early years of the 20th century, which found expression in National Socialism. In 1933, Hitler, reflecting upon Luther's words, said in a newspaper interview, "Gladly we could give each and every Jew a railroad pass and 1,000 marks, note for pocket money to be rid of them." Prior to Hitler's decision to introduce the final solution, that being the extermination of the Jewish people, his course of action was emigration. Hitler in 1933 wanted the Jews out of Germany. That's why he was willing to negotiate with the Jewish executives of a state that had not even been founded yet. He wanted Jews out of the country. He wanted their assets and property, and so he froze them and confiscated them. He wanted their businesses and positions, which robbed pure Aryans of employment. The Zionists, whom he despised for representing the very paradigm of the international Marxist Jew, ironically served Hitler's hope and need. By forcing Jews to go to Palestine, he could rid himself of their presence and yet take their jobs, property, and assets all at the same time. I have one really touching example. The Jews of Germany were educated and refined people, by and large. And they had beautiful homes, and they had done pretty well, despite the anti-Semitism which permeated Germany. And it was a time of difficulty. But houses were taken over by Germans. And there's a story about a little boy who came home from school, just in the 1st or 2nd grade. And he walked home, it wasn't too far from where the school was, and he walked up the steps to his house, and he put his hand in his pocket to take out the key, and he pushed the key into the lock. Nothing happened. He stepped back to look if he's at the right house, if he had the right address. Yes, it's the right address. He tried to unlock the door again. From the inside, someone came to the door and opened the door. And it was a harsh woman who said to the little boy, Who are you and what are you doing here? And he looked up, he said, this is my house. This is where I live. My mommy and daddy must be here. This is my house. The woman said, this is no longer your house. It's our house. And slammed the door. And the Jewish community began to realize what would happen. What would happen to them. That's why the establishment of the State of Israel and the work that has been done since well before 1933 to have a homeland. And that homeland, when you think about it, has done so much, has given a sense of beauty to the world. And all of those statements that were made by that minister, that first I'd burn their schools. What was the Israeli response? To build schools of the most sophisticated and beautiful manner. That I would advise them to realize how evil they are, said by Hitler. And the response is, open our arms to receive individuals who will indeed love others and help others and work so that the community of Israel will cultivate that which is noble and good for the world. We have cell phones that we carry. It was Israel who really developed the beginning of Motorola so that people could communicate, because how important it is to communicate. We have to realize the preciousness of this country, who has done remarkable things to protect itself and to preserve the beauty of how to live life, to respect others, and thereby be respected. That's why Israel is something that we should support in every way we can to preserve the dignity of not only the country, but the values inherent within the Jewish soul. Kein Yehi Ratzon, be this God's will.